All righty. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Fuck Calories podcast. I am Dr. Soleil, and that is Dr. Sarah. And we're going to continue our discussion on different ways of eating. We have discussed in the past all the way from Mediterranean, Whole30, paleo, low carb, keto. And today we're diving more into the veggie-based ways of eating. So, Dr. Sarah, what do you think about eating more vegetables in our life? Should we be doing it? Does everyone do it enough? What are the different ways of doing it? All that kind of stuff.
Totally. So you can have a quote plant-based diet, or you can have a completely plant diet. And there's of course also, we won't really talk about this today, but something we should maybe consider. There's also, I think we talked about it a little bit when we talked about the keto, the carnivore diet, which is no plants. So this is kind of the opposite extreme.
Yep.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about the different versions of that. We are not necessarily prescribing any one type of diet, but we'll kind of talk about the pros and cons of each and kind of how we use certain ones in our own lives and kind of go from there. So let's get started with the different types of plant diets. So the overarching theme today is vegetarianism. But there's many different types, and there's many, just like, there's different types of keto and different types of low carb, there's many different types of vegetarian diets. So let's kind of go through some of them from like the most, let's see, how should we organize this? Let's go from the most restrictive to the least restrictive.
Okay.
So the first one up would be like, for example, veganism. So veganism, I'm sure our audience is familiar with this. I feel like everyone knows somebody that's vegan, and if you have someone in your life that's vegan, you know it often. But veganism is a complete abstinence from any animal derived products. So that includes anything. So even things like gelatin, anything like any even like honey. Some people do not, some vegans do not even have honey.
Right.
So anything that's derived from a non-plant-based source is not included in this diet.
Right.
So let's kind of talk about like what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons about that.
Sure.
Um, in,
So I can start with cons. I don't have a lot of pros because straight up, most of the patients that come to seek me out, my sickest patients and the most, or the patients with the most number of like malnutrition, vitamin and mineral deficiencies tend to be the vegans. So I don't, already that's like a huge con for me, right? Is you're
yeah.
losing a huge source of food and nutrients that you are not getting into your body in any means, right? And so a lot of them have to supplement because there is no way to get that vitamin B12 in, and you're lacking a lot in vitamin D and you're lacking a lot. So they have to make sure you're getting those in. But pros, you're getting fantastic, or you should be getting fantastic sources of vitamins from veggies, right?
Mhm.
Because it's all plant-based and veggies. But those are the two at the top of my head. What are you thinking, pros and cons?
Totally. So I think the biggest pro for veganism is the ethics standpoint. I think you and I both agree that, especially in the United States, the way we do factory farming and factory raising of livestock is just absolutely horrific and is very problematic for many reasons.
Mhm.
And I completely understand a motivation to want to be vegan, and I empathize with it. I have had similar thoughts and been through some things. I have tried it out for similar reasons.
Mhm.
And I totally understand it, and I completely agree with it.
Mhm.
That said, there are ways to obtain meat sources that are sustainably obtained and that are very ethical, especially, I mean, this is not something that I do personally, so I don't mean to like uh promote this, but for people who do like wild game hunting,
Mhm.
um so I mean, this is something that we should talk about, and this is maybe not where you thought this episode was going to go.
But yeah.
But yeah, but let's be honest. So I don't participate in hunting, but I follow some people on social media that do, and they make a really good point in certain scenarios. A lot of the people that are passionate about conservation and um, environmental concerns still participate in hunting. And the way that they describe it is that nature is pretty brutal and that no wildlife species has a death that is painless.
Mm,
A lot of these like big game, elk, etc., a lot of these animals, they get to a point where they can't run as fast. And they die usually a pretty horrific death, being eaten by another animal. Maybe they get their leg trapped in a stream. Maybe the herd crosses a stream and they can't cross and they drown. I mean, though there is no animal that like dies of old age safely in their bed. And so the argument that they make for this is way off topic. This is not at all veganism, but that's okay. So the argument that some of these people who participate in like elk and deer hunting, especially like axis deer in Hawaii, is they talk about the fact that, look, if, yes, it can be like a pseudo sport, but I am, obtaining meat from my family for the whole year.
mhm,
And I choose an animal that is nearing the end of its life. They never hunt young animals, the people that are really passionate about it.
mhm.
Um, and the way that they describe it is very ethical. And I think that so basically their goal is to get a clean kill, which is like a very quick and fast, immediate um, shot, either through bow hunting or with a rifle, etc.
And
And that is, sorry,
oh, I was going to
and
say,
that
and
is
you know exactly where it came from, right? Because they did it.
exactly. And that is the most humane death that anyone in that animal's tribe is ever gonna have.
Yep.
And so I think that that is a really excellent point, and I think that that is a really wonderful way to get really high quality protein sources in your diet if you do have this ethical bend, and that you want to be mostly vegan, but then potentially possibly supplement your diet with these high quality big game
Mm,
sources that people hunt in the US. So I think that that's something to be considered. It's that would kick you out of the vegan club.
right.
But I think it's a discussion that we should have. Like maybe this is something that, that for those who want to be plant-based for ethical reasons, this might be something that they consider. And this might be a way to allow them to get high quality, high bioavailable vitamins and high quality protein in their diet.
Right.
So it's anyway, I'm way off topic, but but
No,
this is
I
something
think,
that,
yeah, I think that's something to think about. I see it a lot living in Minnesota, right? A lot
oh
of
yeah, totally.
are hunting year round and they are really big bow hunters and
Yeah,
are really into
exactly.
it. But I would almost consider them because I have a lot of patients that eat like that. They're more plant central, but
Exactly.
the protein they get, they know exactly where it came from because they know exactly, oh, I killed that. This venison comes from this date, right? It was
Exactly.
December 14th or whatever. I cleaned it myself. It was,
Right.
I sent it off for testing, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So the same can be said, right, when they do the wild turkeys and the venison and etc. But then the rest of that, they're still plant central. Now that would almost, I would be interested to think, do you think that falls under flexitarian? So
Hmm.
flexitarian is still plant central, but they do have right sources of protein and meat in their diet, but just less than. I almost put that in the same category as plant-based, right? And
Yeah.
so when I say
Yeah.
plant-based, I'm thinking more, oh, more than half your plate is
Right.
vegetables and plants, and
Right.
then you're sprinkling in other sources of good fats and proteins, etc.
Yeah.
Would you consider the same?
I would completely. The other thing that I would say is, obviously, like like I work 80 hours a week. I don't have time to go bow hunting in
Right.
Montana.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't really want to. We're not going to talk about any specific names, but people can Google it. There are companies that will, that provide this meat that you can
Mhm.
sustainably source and purchase. Um, so that is something that you can do, even if you don't want to commit to like learning how to bow hunt yourself
Yeah.
and taking, several weeks off to go do this a few times a year, or even less than that, because you only, at least the people that I know that do this personally, they go like 2 weeks out of the year and they have enough meat for their whole family for the rest of the year.
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
As long as you have the storage space, I think that's really the only limiting factor, right? But it is definitely a lot cheaper and more sustainable, and you know exactly where it came from and you cleaned it yourself, etc. So I think going back to veganism, that's a huge standpoint, right? Of I don't like how these animals are raised, I don't like how they're treated, I don't like how they're pumped with medications and
Yeah,
antibiotics and right, all sorts of stuff. We've all
yeah,
seen those documentaries.
yeah.
So I think this is another take, right? Of
Mhm.
if they are ethically, you know, ethically raised and sourced and I feel good about it and they're from nature and they lived a really good life. I think
Right,
that is almost the opposite, right? And they're thinking like, I still understand where you're coming from and I'm going to do it this way, right?
right.
As opposed to um other ways of eating possibly, right? Of
Mhm.
saying,
Yeah,
"Oh, forget it. I'm just standard American diet. I don't really care.
right,
It's factory farmed and raised, and I just buy
right,
it from my
right,
local grocery store, and I don't really care, etc." So there's
right.
definitely tiers and
Yeah,
spectrums, right?
yeah.
And all of these different ways
Totally.
of
Well,
eating.
and on the topic of like different tiers, even though I do not recommend the vegan diet, um, I think we could probably both agree that at least at the beginning,
Mm,
it is technically better than the standard American diet than like, eating fast food, on a regular basis and highly processed food. But I think we also have to consider that I know many vegans who, and you probably do as well, who do consume a lot of processed foods and do not abstain from the standard American diet. So, yes, it can be better than the standard American diet, but you can also be vegan and eat a lot of crap, like Oreos are vegan. And I know someone who is vegan who literally subsists like 40% of her diet on Oreos.
hmm
And that is not ideal. That is
Right.
not getting any of the benefits that supposed plant-based. You're not doing yourself any favors by doing that.
Exactly. And so I
So,
think you're getting the positives of like, oh, put a sticker on myself and I call myself vegan. But yeah, if you're getting all your calories from Oreos, we got bigger fish to fry, even though you don't eat fish, right? So
yeah,
it kind of takes us to
yeah, exactly.
be plant-based but eat fish. You'd be considered
Yeah.
a pescatarian, right? If
Yep.
you wanted to be plant-based but eat eggs, right?
Mhm.
That's ovo, right? And then if you wanted to incorporate dairy, then it's lacto. So you could technically be lacto ovo vegetarian. So you're still not having meat, right? Or animal protein of any sort, but you're having eggs. Um, which I guess could be that's a question. Would eggs be considered animal protein? To me, it's not because it's a byproduct. But I guess we could discuss that in the comments.
Yeah,
And then add in dairy, right, for that lacto.
yeah.
So have we hit all the different types in our spectrum of all the way from veganism to flexitarianism to everything in between?
I
What are
think
your
the
thoughts?
only one that we left out is potentially pescatarian. I think we mentioned it, but I don't think we discussed it. But basically, it's um, a plant-based diet, but then also incorporating fish.
Hmm.
And so with that, it's more rare, but you could also be, for example, like a pesco-ovotarian.
Yep.
I think we probably call it the other way around, ovo-pescatarian. And same thing with lacto as well. Like you can kind of stack all those prefixes however you like, whatever works for you.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. So I think the benefits of kind of taking some of those niche kind of like, oh, if I incorporate eggs, if I incorporate fish, but I don't want red meat, or you know what I mean, wherever you're at, the benefit of adding those
yeah.
is the fact that you're getting a great source of protein and minerals and vitamins in there that you would not else otherwise be getting. And
Yeah.
so in order to make up for that, that's where the supplements and the vitamins and the, oh my gosh, now I'm taking, 12 to 20 pills and powders and all sorts of
Right.
right supplements to take, which if we want to talk supplements, I'm well versed and we can talk about
Right.
it. But
Right.
once I get my patients off and then they start feeling better and they start feeling stronger and their DEXA scans are reversing and they're like, and I
Yeah.
was like, yeah. And now you have the energy to go out and do all these things. And it's just those little changes. But
Yeah.
I think the hard work is getting to the root reason of why they're eating a certain way, right? And so then it's a, oh, is it a ethical reason? Is because it's sourced? Do you want to talk to my friend that has a farm and you can actually go see, the cows or whatever that is, trying to figure out a way that works for you, that you feel best, you're getting a great source of nutrients in, and you can live the quality of life that you want to live, right?
Yeah, completely agree.
So,
There was recently a documentary on Netflix that came out. It was a twin study.
yeah.
Um, I think it was called You Are What You Eat, I think. I can't remember. But basically they took twins. So these are people who are biologically, like genetically the same person, and had put one of them on a vegan diet and then put the other one on a plant-based diet that included good sources of protein. And I found the show a little bit disingenuous, and I hope I don't ruffle any feathers here, because the actual paper was published for
Mhm,
this exact same study, and some of the findings that were in the paper they did not include in the documentary. In
mhm,
the documentary, it was very pro-vegan,
mhm,
but what they didn't show is that in the actual paper, the so like for example, both groups. So this is so again, one twin was plant-based and they had like 11 or something sets of twins. I can't remember. But one of the twins was vegan and the other twin, they called it omnivore, but it was plant-based with high quality sources of protein. And for example, both twins in all of the pairs um, decreased their LDL cholesterol. All of the twins pairs lost weight. I can't even remember, but there were a lot of things that a lot of them both improved. However, one of the things that was not discussed in the documentary was that the fact that the lean mass
mhm,
the vegan twins lost significantly more lean mass than the what they were calling omnivore, but we would call it plant-based high quality proteins. And there were a few things like that. The body fat percentage with that, then of course, therefore went slightly up versus going down in the omnivore group. So there were things like that that if you actually pull the paper, and you can do this, anyone can Google this. Um, that was not represented in the documentary. So I would encourage you to think for yourself and consider that study when people are talking about, oh, well, this Netflix show showed that veganism is the best. And when in reality, the producers of that show were highly biased going in and didn't quite show us all of the results of that study.
absolutely, and it helps that it was funded by a fake meat
Also
company,
true.
right?
Yes,
And
also true.
so they're pushing their agenda, which is,
Yeah,
"Hey, buy more fake meat." And
right.
if you're trying to eat a whole food,
Yeah,
nutritious, well-balanced diet,
that is not the way to do it.
yeah, I'm not eating a lot of processed fake meat because
Yeah,
the ingredients in my ground beef patty is beef, and the
yeah.
ingredients in the Impossible Burger is 13 plus ingredients long, and most
So
people,
many of them are seed oils and highly inflammatory
yep,
substances that are not good for you.
yes,
Um,
exactly. So
so
it's really, again, it takes us back to the spectrum of like, yeah, but where do I put fake meat, right? Like, I
yeah,
technically am still vegetarian and vegan if I eat this, but it's
right.
chock full of
Yeah,
chemicals and these weird things that they're putting together
yeah,
to make a meat like substance. And then my
right,
other question is, well, if you don't want to eat meat, why are you forcing your fake food into a meat
right,
like substance?
right. Well,
Right?
and the other thing is like, say that you have a fake meat that like I'll just make up some numbers, but say it's not. A lot of the fake meats are very highly calorically dense, but let's say a fake meat is, 1/5 of the calories that a regular beef patty is. So instead of eating the fake meat 5 days a week, instead just be plant-based all of your days of the week and then only eat one beef patty instead of every single day. I think that you'll be much better off in the long run. Because you're getting the good sources of well, first of all, we should also go into the different nutrients that are missing in the vegan diet, or
Mm,
not missing, but that are harder to get if you're completely only plant products. But anyway, so I think that if you do that once a week instead of every single fake meat every single day,
Mhm.
that you're going to be better off.
Right, right. Because you're still getting those nutrients. Yeah. So I think it does come down to the lack of nutrients and vitamins and macros that you're
Mhm.
getting, and a huge portion of that is the protein, which
Yeah,
is why when you are not eating this essential macronutrient, which is protein, it's essential to life,
right.
then you start cannibalizing your own muscles. And that's when you develop sarcopenia or wasting away of that lean muscle, which we talked about,
Yep.
right, with the vegan plant based patients. And they don't tell people about that, right, until
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah.
That it happened, it was there in the study, and then they just,
Yeah.
brush it away and like
Yeah.
never mention it. So
Yeah.
everyone,
Yeah.
makes it
Well, I
sound.
had a trainer that used to call. So basically, if you are losing a lot of weight, but you are also like, and when I say losing weight, if you are losing fat mass only
Mm,
versus if you are losing both lean mass and fat mass. So for example, if you do just a straight caloric loss,
mm,
or a caloric deficit in order to lose, and you are not increasing your protein, you are not doing strength training, you are going to lose your lean mass. And I had a trainer describe it as you'll look like a melted candle. And I think that is so true because we have seen what that looks like.
mm,
We have seen maybe not Ozempic face, but we have seen people kind of talk about like that look. They
mhm.
just like are saggy everywhere and they look like a melted candle. And if you are going for that look, awesome. But one of the ways that we can help prevent that is while you are working on your macros, if you keep your protein high and you continue doing strength training, you are going to lose fat mass and you're not going to lose that lean mass.
Right. Right. And we know how important muscle mass is for our health
Yeah,
and our continuation of health, like into older age, right?
yeah,
And that's what I mean. Like some of my older patients, when I increase their protein and they start strength training again, they're able to regain that energy and their balance is back and they're not falling as much and
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Their osteopenia is reversing, and it's
yeah,
because it's right. You put the good stuff on, which is the muscle mass, which you need
yeah,
the protein for. You work out, you lift heavy things,
yeah,
in a safe environment, right? Don't try and go
yeah,
lift a car, but
exactly.
um,
Right.
and that's we're talking foundational health, and then you won't
Yeah,
need to see us as often because you're doing
right.
great.
Right. So how much protein should we get? And then what are some of the recommendations and by us? And then like what are some of the recommendations like in national organizations as far as like how much protein you should get? And are you ever concerned about kidney function? So let's talk about that.
So everyone has a different idea of requirements, right, for protein. And
Yeah,
it's really hard to put a hard and fast number on it and say this is absolute, right, because everybody changes and everyone is looking for different things.
right.
I will say though that the majority of patients, if I can get them to at least 100 grams of protein a day, they're feeling better. And
Yeah,
then if they want to stop because they're like, listen, doc, I'm feeling great. I've reversed all the things. I'll see you in a
right,
year. Perfect.
right,
Right.
right.
Go forth. Now, my patients that start on 100 grams and they go, yeah, now I want to do X, Y, and Z. Now I want to
Mhm.
start actually bodybuilding. Now I want to really get jacked. Now I want, well, your needs are going to go up. Right.
Yeah,
And so our minimum protein intake actually has to go up to offset, right, all of that calories that you're burning, but also the gains that you're wanting to have
right.
and take. So those numbers are kind of different. The national, I guess, I really don't like to bring in the US standards, right, for nutrition.
Yeah, they're terrible.
So poor.
Yeah,
And so I never go off of them
right.
because they're never right. And I just, why even
And
look?
why aren't, so the reason why we're saying they're never right, it's not because we well, maybe it is. Not because we like are trashing the USDA and the FDA, but the requirements that they are publishing are the minimum amount to prevent a disease, to prevent a deficiency, like a functional deficiency of something. It is not what is the amount that is optimal for you to have a to have a life of vitality.
Right.
It is what is the minimum amount that prevents something bad from happening.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean that you are feeling good. It doesn't mean that you are having meeting the goals that you want to. It doesn't mean that you are not losing lean mass. It doesn't mean that you're not breaking a hip later on. It's
Right.
just like in the short term, what is the minimum amount that prevents, like you catabolizing your own nitrogen balance. So I think that that's something that is really important. And so I do something similar. I have all of my patients shoot for whatever their ideal lean mass is. I shoot for them to have that however many that is in pounds, I shoot for that in grams. So I only see women patients. I'm an OBGYN primarily. I also am obesity medicine, and we've talked about this before, but so I only see women. Most of my patients, that comes down to somewhere between 100 and 150 grams of protein per day. And that is what we shoot for. Maybe we don't always make it, but that is like our goal. That's what we're thinking about when we wake up in the morning. How am I going to split my day?
Mhm.
And with my meals that I'm consuming, and that's my goal.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is kind of something, a good metric to kind of start with. And if you don't know what your lean mass is, 100 is like a good goal to start with.
Mhm.
And I think that you will find that um, if you are on that, oh, the other thing I want to say, but I think you will find that you will feel really good.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that I wanted to say that I wanted to bring up, especially for those of us who have insulin resistance and maybe have some PCOS type picture, as you know, a few years ago, I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I don't have diabetes. It's hard to get a continuous glucose monitor unless unless you're a diabetic who has failed like individual finger sticks.
Mhm.
But there are some companies, for those who are in the biohacking space, they may have heard of some of them that that will sell you expensive. I only did it for a short time because of the cost. If it hadn't been so expensive, I'd probably still be doing it. That they will sell you a continuous glucose monitor that you can just use even if you're not diabetic to kind of just see how certain foods affect you.
Right.
And it was illuminating. It was so, so, so helpful. I learned how, like, when I do an overnight shift, how horrendous. I could eat the exact same meal, the exact same portions, because, I used to have that meal plan.
Mhm.
I could eat the exact same food. And if I had it after I had been awake all night versus if I'd had a good sleep all night, the
Mhm.
exact same macros, the exact same calories, the exact same portions, everything, the way that it would affect me was insane. Or the difference in the way that it would affect me. But additionally, talking about protein, I also found that if I had, like if I wanted to have something sweet, like a piece of chocolate or whatever else, if I like preloaded with some protein, like either having a protein shake before I had that candy bar,
Mhm.
my blood sugar would not bump versus if I just had an empty stomach and had the exact same thing. And so I think that that is something that is super important that we can also discuss with our patients about how if you are trying to improve your insulin resistance,
Mhm.
you almost, I'm not going to say you can't do it, but increasing your protein is so helpful as far as regulating those carbs and how you process those carbs.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think I was gonna say, I think you can see that a lot if you wanted to even buy a glucometer from Walmart or, whatever, you could. You just have to
And they're
stick
cheap.
more often.
Yes.
But if you're only doing this for 2 weeks just to kind of see, you could
Yeah.
get by with a less expensive option, right, than a continuous glucose monitor. That might be available. But absolutely, I know when we started messing around and playing, I had a patient and they were kind of doing the same thing. I don't know why. He loved Pop Tarts.
Yeah.
So he had a Pop Tart and then he like saw it spike and he's like, yeah, I knew it was bad. But then the
Yeah.
next day he ate 3 eggs and then he
Yeah.
had a Pop Tart and then it just buffered, right? And it just never went. And he spoke and he's like, oh my God, I thought you were kidding. And I was like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like, so if we're comparing the two, I'd rather you have the 3 eggs and stop. But
Right.
if you want a
Right.
Pop Tart, it's better to have
Right.
it after the eggs than just a Pop Tart by itself, right? And so I think that really helped him see
Yeah.
the huge difference, right, that we talk about. And then you're like, oh, I can absolutely play some of these games of if
Yeah.
I only need or if my minimum starting goal is 100 grams of protein, what does that look like, right? Is
Right.
that 3 meals of 30 grams plus a
Right.
10-gram snack?
Right.
Perfect. What's in a 10
Right.
gram snack? Well, that's a small little pre-packaged container of Greek yogurt, right?
Yeah.
That you're going to take to work and have at 3 p.m., whatever. And then he goes, okay, what's 30 grams of protein? Well, it depends. What do you want, right? Are we looking at eggs? Are we looking at salmon? Are we looking at,
Right.
right? What are our protein sources?
Right.
And that's always an interesting topic with our vegetarian or vegan patients, right? Of
Yeah.
those sources, because when you're looking at plant-based protein, you're
Mhm.
very limited.
Yeah.
And the stomach and our GI system and the does not absorb the protein from these plant sources as
As
readily
well.
or as easily compared to animal sources. And so that can be an issue of getting your GI actually used to breaking down some of those products. And can you physically get in enough? And
Right.
then the third concern is, are you having too much of one that might be offsetting some other issues? And I see this a lot with people that have high amounts of products, right? For their protein, and that's a high dose of phytoestrogens, right? That you're getting.
Yeah.
Whether or not you know about them, you're getting them.
Right. Right. And I know that you and I are both child free. And so maybe our audience perhaps may lean more in that direction. So maybe it's not an issue. But for those, so I'm an OBGYN. I also do a little bit of PCOS work and preconception weight gain or weight management. Um, if you are having high doses of phytoestrogens, it can lead to temporary infertility. It can cause you fertility issues. And so that's just, it is what it is. And so that's something to keep in mind and, like decide like, what is that doing to reproductive system? And is that a good thing?
Right, absolutely. And if you're trying to conceive or trying to balance hormones, like, is that what's throwing things off?
Right.
Right. So
Right. Exactly. So I think we maybe have beat the protein to death. Let's talk about some other nutrients that are harder to get on a vegan diet, and some sources that we can get from there.
sure. So off the top, I mean, do you have any you want to start with? Because I'm thinking vitamin D, B vitamins, right? Things like that
Yeah.
already.
I knew that you were going to want to talk about B vitamins. I wanted to talk a little bit about iron.
Yeah.
So iron is really, really important. As we know, I think probably a lot of our patients may have experienced anemia.
Mhm.
Um, but there is a lot of new data coming out that even if you don't have anemia, if you are iron deficient, even without anemia, so before you get to the point where you're bleeding, so for any patient who is female who's on menstrual suppression, they may not exhibit anemia because they're not having a regular monthly bleed. Or if you have a patient who is postmenopausal, or men
Mhm.
may not obviously they're not going to have a monthly bleed. And so if you are not depleting your blood volume as readily, and so you may not have an anemia component, even if you're not getting in enough iron.
Mhm.
And so there's newly recognized is non-anemic iron deficiency.
Mhm.
And it has been shown that if you are like, especially in the sports medicine world, that if you are trying to optimize your performance, if you are iron deficient, you are not going to be as effective. You're not going to be able to run you're not going to have mitochondrial reproduction and mitochondrial optimization than if you were not iron deficient, even if you equilibrate for the blood volume or the blood hematocrit, for example.
Mhm.
And so iron is something that is really, really challenging to absorb from plant sources. And so if you are only getting iron from plant sources, the amount of iron that you have to eat is significantly more to actually absorb the exact same amount. On top of that, because iron is not highly concentrated in very many plant foods, the volume of food that you have to get to have the same amount of quote iron that you are in, like that is going down your tube, whether or not you are absorbing it or not, is
Mhm.
vastly more. So, like for example, one of the highest vegetarian or vegan foods that is the highest in iron is lentils.
Mhm.
But the amount of lentils that you would have to eat to equivalent, having like a beef patty is enormous. I mean, it's like almost not physically possible to eat that much in one day. And so that is something that's really important that we have to kind of consider, like what other nutrients are you missing in addition to protein, what nutrients are you likely to be suboptimal in if you are on a vegan diet versus if you have a quote a plant-based diet, but then supplement with these high quality animal sources. So I think that that's really important. We got to like discuss and consider.
Yep, absolutely. And then I will take the iron issue one step further in that unfortunately the majority of the iron supplements on the market that maybe these vegan or vegetarian patients or people have started to take is actually plant-based iron. So you're
Yeah,
still not absorbing it well, which is why a lot of people that take iron supplements complain of abdominal distress, bloating, constipation, because your GI
yeah,
system is like, what do I do with this?
yeah.
I literally cannot absorb this, and it causes GI issues. Now, to offset that a little bit, you can take vitamin C with iron
Mhm.
sources, and vitamin C helps you absorb that iron. But if we can put you on a animal-based iron supplement, and in your mind, you're like, okay, that's okay because I'm not eating the animal, right?
Right,
You're going to have better results. But
right,
again, if we just don't want to keep taking pills and supplements,
right,
can I get another source of
right.
animal-based protein?
Yep.
But iron is a huge one. Iron's also been linked to all sorts of fatigue and joint pain, but restless leg syndrome is a huge one.
Oh,
I know,
so true.
yeah.
Huge.
Once we increase those doses, people are like, "Oh, I'm now sleeping through the night," and I'm not, So, but very often, iron can be at well, I was going to say when I think iron deficiency, I'm also looking for B vitamin deficiencies, right? And all of the Bs. So not just B12, but your the folates and the B6s and all of them,
Yeah,
which are found readily in animal-based proteins, but not a lot in a lot of vegetarian or vegan sources, especially if you are not eating the eggs, because sometimes I'm like, well, maybe if you just eat a bunch of eggs, right? But if you're vegan, that's not
right.
right.
Not an option.
Um, and then vitamin D is going to be a huge one, right? And I see this a lot just because I live so close to Canada, like the no,
Right,
more north you
right,
go, it's just everyone has vitamin D deficiency.
right.
And it is such a low hanging fruit that, like, oh, if you can increase this,
Yeah,
everything gets better.
yeah,
So we absolutely have huge holes in our nutrition when we are not getting these vitamins and nutrients in our system.
absolutely. So hopefully our audience can take in all of the advice that we've given today and kind of help build a way of eating plan for themselves.
Yes, but also make, I'm going to reiterate that there is not one perfect diet or way of eating,
Absolutely.
right? And that's why we're going to keep putting out episodes talking about different ones. So I don't necessarily want you to feel like we are bashing one or choosing one. We just want you to be aware of maybe some of the downfalls of some of these ways of eating. But again, I look at everything like a spectrum, and some things are better than other things. And if you can choose a little bit better today compared to yesterday, you're doing better. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
alrighty, y'all. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.